So yesterday, the Las Vegas Raiders hired general manager John Spytek, a guy that we don't really know a whole lot of. This is a guy that we know was with the Buccaneers for a number of years, and he's worked with the Eagles, the Browns, the Broncos. But he's a guy that we don't generally know a lot about. Like, has this guy actually made draft picks? What is this guy's thoughts and his opinions on certain positions? And I've been kind of looking at some of this guy's pressers, some of these podcasts that John Spytek has done. And there's definitely some interesting things he said about certain positions, certain groups, how he thinks of, when it comes to free agency and draft. And today we're going to get into it. I'm going to show you guys some of the clips that I've been able to pull. Most of these come from one video specifically, but it's interesting nonetheless, right? So I'm excited to get into this. Let's just get right into it. I think one of the most important parts of being a good general manager is what's your approach to handling both free agency as well as the NFL draft. Right, and what I mean by that is this, if I look at players and I'm saying, hey, I'm gonna analyze an offensive tackle, right? There's different ways that I think of offensive tackles that I think will be good football players, right? There's things that I look for, right? And I'll give you an example. Olu Fashanu came out last year in the NFL draft, and he was my number one rated offensive tackle. And the reason why I had him as my number one guy was because the movement he had as an offensive tackle. Now, movement is one trait that some people will value and put higher. Some people look at it like, hey, movement doesn't matter all that much to us. A team like the Bengals, for example, are a great example of this. The Bengals have Trent Brown as one of their tackles. And last year, they drafted Marius Mims, another tackle that doesn't move all that well. Right? So the Bengals clearly do not value movement in an offensive tackle. But for me, in the scouting role that I've had, I've always valued movement. Right? To me, it's the most important part of an offensive tackle. Spytek was kind of asked a little bit about his approach to guys in free agency as well as NFL draft. Listen into what he had to say, because it's very interesting if you ask me.
You can't always get everybody you want, and like the way we see it, if we think we're thin here, and I'm not going to answer the question you want me to answer it, but like if we think we're thin here, like guys don't always see it that way. So at the end of the day, we're just looking for good football players. And what we've kind of found is when you get into free agency, the high character kids, the competitive kids who football means the most to, they're the ones that stick. And you want those. You don't want the trait kids that fell because of character, but they can run. They just don't work. And so we really focus more on the person, and adding them to a room where it's like, we focus on position. We're trying to fill the roster out in a way that it makes sense, but we're not just going to take guys. No different than the draft, I don't think. We're going to take guys that we think are good football players that fit what we do here.
So to me, what this guy just said is very, very interesting. So first and foremost, he says that high character in free agency is a big part of what they're looking for, right? They're looking for guys that love the game of football. They're looking to bring back guys that really, really care to be great. And, sometimes us fans, we don't value these things because we're not actually in the building. So we don't know which guys have high characters and which guys don't. We don't really know. But one of the things that I learned when I was at the Hula Bowl 2 weeks ago talking to so many different players, right? Guys from every school across the country. These guys are guys that are most likely going to be drafted. At least a third of them will end up being drafted. The rest of them will at least have an opportunity as a UDFA. And one of the things I learned was there were like 5 or 6 guys that were very, very high character, right? They're talkative. They spoke well. They did a lot of the things you want. After practice, for example, there are a couple of guys that would stay behind and they'd work on their technique, for example, right? There's guys from Colorado, for example, that I had noticed that after practice, while everybody else is walking into the locker room, these guys are sitting behind and they're hitting the bags and they're working on their technique with certain coaches. And there's other things, right? Like we did testing at the Hula Bowl and I tracked the testing and I knew every single guy that was coming in the very first time you told them versus guys that did not want to do the testing and they didn't show up, right? And to me, I'm not saying one way's good or one way's bad necessarily, but what I'm saying is, high character players matter, right? And not every single person out there is a high character player. But via free agency specifically, John Spytek obviously is going to value high character. And he also said, and I think this is kind of interesting, that we don't care about traits. Right? We don't care about a trait a guy might have in terms of the physicality. He said guys that can run, right, that are physically, maybe more athletic. We don't care about that because those guys don't always work. And Spytek's 100% right on this, right? I will always value production on tape over athleticism. Olufashano, for example, I said is very, very good in his movement, but he also has really good production. And we saw that in college at Penn State, and it translated really, really well. When he ultimately took that tackle position over for the Jets this past season, the guy was an absolute stud. But let me give you another example of a guy who, you can look at and say he has traits. The Raiders took him 7th overall pick just a year ago in Tyree Wilson. Tyree Wilson had traits, and Dave Ziegler drafted Tyree Wilson based off of traits. Traits don't always pan out, and I think what John Spytek is telling us is you're going to take the guy with the high character, you're going to take the guy with the production on tape, and that's always the way you should always value a player, right? It should always be based off the production and what you see. Add in the high character aspect, and that's how you should draft, because that's how you're ultimately going to win build a winner. Not every single player you draft is going to work out. Because you don't know how guys are going to develop once they get into the NFL. But generally speaking, if you take a guy with production in college, they care about football, they're going to translate into being a good football player. And to me, that actually excites me a lot with John Spytek, right? Just hearing him actually say that really inspires me, because I think the Raiders have made a lot of mistakes taking traits over production. Dave Ziegler, right? Tyree Wilson was one of them. Even Byron Young, the D tackle, right? He was fast and quick and explosive, but his tape was terrible. And we took him in the 3rd round when we could have probably had him in like round 5 or 6. So again, to me, traits should not matter more than production. Of course, traits are nice to have, but production always comes first. Now, Spytek also said some other interesting things that I want to kind of share with you guys. So obviously the Raiders have a huge need at the running back position, right? By far, our biggest need right now on the offense side of the football is the running back position, right? Outside of quarterback's kind of a wild card. It's hard to actually get your quarterback right. We're probably not going to get a quarterback this year, truth be told. We'll have to wait another year, in my opinion. But quarterback is different than like running back or offensive line, or if you needed a wide receiver, that's pretty easy to kind of figure out. Running back's a position we got to figure out. And the Tampa Bay Buccaneers were also kind of in this same position over the past, many, many years, right? Spytek's been there for 9 years. But Spytek over the past 2 or 3 years has really been in charge of drafting. And I didn't mention this at the beginning, but I should go ahead and mention this before we get into running backs. John Spytek, as soon as the Tampa Bay Buccaneers drafted over the last 2 years, usually for us, whenever our general manager had finished the draft, usually the very next day he comes out and they talk about the draft, right? We heard Tom Telesco do this past draft. Prior to that, Dave Ziegler came out after each of the 2 drafts that they had, literally the next day, and they're talking about that draft. John Spytek's the guy that's been coming out for the last 2 years talking about the draft. So to me, that tells me that John Spytek had a lot more to do with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers draft over the past couple of years than what we might actually think. And I was listening to some Buccaneers fans talk about it as well. And that's the general census, right? That John Spytek was really, really, highly, his impact was highly valued when it came to the draft. Almost like he was making some of these picks, and he was making, setting up some of the board and making sure some of the guys that they're valuing over other guys. It's almost like his input mattered a lot more than what people might realize that an assistant general manager might be doing. And also keep in mind, not every single room across the NFL is the same. If the Buccaneers general manager right now values the assistant general manager enough, he might put that guy in charge of the draft. On the other end of it, the Raiders' Tom Telesco might not value Champ Kelly as much, and might tell Champ Kelly, you'll be in charge of the free agencies, right? The player personnels and those type of things. And Telesco himself might feel like, I'm going to take charge of the draft, right? But it seems like John Spytek was basically put in charge of the Buccaneers for the draft. And he talked about the running backs a little bit and kind of what he looks for and what he values. There's 2 videos that were taken from different parts of the interview, one from the beginning, one towards the end. I'm going to clip them together. I'm going to have you guys watch this, and we'll talk about it on the other side.
Just in terms of his elusiveness, he's a smaller guy, but no running back likes to be tackled. This guy really does like it.
No, it's we had him in on the visit. He told us the first guy doesn't tackle him. And I think that's what you're looking for as running backs, especially when they're not the biggest running backs, right? There's no secret here that Bucky he's not Christian Okoye, so he's not going to run through people's face all the time. But you look at his production, whether it was in Minnesota or Oregon, he's 6 yards a carry. So he's hard to get on the ground. And for a man that's less than 200 pounds, when you do hit him, which is hard to do, he's hard to knock off his feet. So he has a lot of qualities that we look for in a running back. Well, he is a super instinctive runner with great feet, really good toughness, really high character. He's good in the pass game. He's an efficient, productive runner. I just think he brings a lot to the table. He's just a good football player, and people focus on the size and the speed is, 4.56 is what we have on him. It's not elite, but it's not slow. But all he does is get yards, and he scores touchdowns, and he's hard to get down in space. And, he's just another player that defenses have to focus on and figure out, like, how do we get this guy on the ground? Which, to me, running backs, that's the biggest thing. Like, whether you run 4.30 or 4.70, the ones that defenses have the hardest time getting on the ground for a myriad of reasons are the best ones. And he's like that.
So there you guys have it, right? So obviously Spytek is putting it out there that when they brought in Bucky Brooks, essentially for the interview process, right, who's probably brought in on one of those top visits, Bucky Irving, one of the things he had said to John Spytek was that, I might be 5'9", I might be 190 pounds, but I can guarantee you that first guy will not tackle me, right? And that's an interesting as hell takeaway that John Spytek remembers from the conversation he had with Bucky Irving. I remember this guy speaks to hundreds of people, hundreds of scouts, hundreds of players, hundreds of agents, hundreds of coaches. There's so much information out there. They write 3,000 plus reports every single year. And this guy remembered that Bucky Irving said the first guy's not going to tackle me. And he almost went back to that the second time as well, in the second clip interview there. And what's interesting about all of that is the fact that that's such a true statement. And I could not agree more with it today. When I started evaluating and really paying attention to things like 6-7 years ago, I thought a lot different about the running back position than I do today, right? Today, I realized that running backs are going to be different. Not every running back's the same. There's different types of running backs, but they can all have success in various different ways. And I'll give you guys a couple of examples. We can look at a guy like Saquon Barkley, who has really, really good vision, and he has really good movement and jump cut ability. And what that means is, he might be running in the A gap, and he might realize that, hey, a linebacker's coming over the top, and he now has left the C gap open, and he'll quickly jump cut. He'll be able to quickly change direction, and he'll go from the A gap to the C gap, and he'll be gone 80 yards to the house. Josh Jacobs might not be able to move as well as Saquon Barkley, but Josh Jacobs also has really good vision, right? He can make himself skinny. He can, he might not have elite speed, but he'll break tackles. He'll run people over, and he'll be able to have success. You got a guy like Nick Chubb, who's kind of in the middle of Josh Jacobs and Saquon Barkley. You have a guy like Christian McCaffrey, who's really, really good in terms of contact balance, has really good vision as well. There's different type of running backs. Not every running back is built the same. Bucky Irving, 5'9", some people would write that off a little bit. And John Spytek's basically saying that this guy's hard to get off his feet. He'll always make that first man miss, essentially. And all he does is he gets yards, right? And more than that, he gets, he gets out in space and he makes people miss. And he's hard to tackle in space. And that could not be more true when it comes to the running back position. You look at this upcoming class here. You got Ashton Jeanty, who most people think is going to end up going like the top 15. I think he'll probably end up going in the top 15. I don't think he'll go in the top 5 or 6. I don't think the Raiders should take him either. I think he's going to be a great running back, but the thing with this class is there's a lot of good running backs. And I almost think Spytek feels that, hey, Ashton Jeanty could be great at 6, but so can Caleb Johnson out of Iowa. Caleb Johnson could be great as well, and you might not have to take him with the 6th overall pick. You might be able to get him with pick 38, right? Or you might be able to get him in the 3rd round, right? A guy like Caleb Johnson, or if it's not Caleb Johnson, maybe it's a guy like Hamilton out of UNC, and if it's not him, maybe it's a guy like RJ Harvey out of UCF. And if it's not him, maybe it's the next running back. There's like 8 or 9 really, really good running backs coming out this year. And these guys are guys that will make you miss. They're really good in space. They're guys they're guys that will have success. And to me, it almost feels like John Spytek is not only going to just draft the running back to draft one. He's not necessarily going to value a running back high either, but he'll just find some sneaky guys that can make people miss. I would target one in the 2nd or 3rd round if I'm the Raiders. And the opposite pick, right? If you go running back second round, you take a guard in the third, vice versa. Take a running back in the third, you take a guard in the second. In fact, talking a little bit about offensive linemen, Spytek talked a little bit about guards as well. And I do have a little bit of criticism for him in this instance, but I want you guys to check out what he said. We'll kind of talk about this on the other side.
Yeah, I bet he did. He, just, it's like you think of UTEP, like what do you think of? And you're like, yeah, Elijah Klein. I mean, he's going to sell out, like kind of like Graham. He's going to give you everything he's got. He's a big man. I mean, I think when he walks in, you see his shoulders, you see the girth to him. And he's another guy that, like Graham talked about the other day, like he's out there to block his guy, and he's out there to finish his guy, and it's not personal. It's just my job is to protect the quarterback and to win the line of scrimmage, and he just does that over and over and over again. And non-combine guy, a little bit under the radar, small town, kind of in between. I think San Bernardino and L.A. out there. I'm not the best with geography out in L.A., but he's the kind of guy that's earned it everywhere he's been, and he'll fit in great in that room. I know that.
So there you guys have it, right? He basically is putting it out there, talking a little bit about the two guys that they drafted this past class. Elijah Klein was a 6th-round pick. He kind of went under the radar. He came out of UTEP. A lot of people have no idea what UTEP is. But it's an interesting school. They produced some players in the past. And Elijah Klein is one of those guys that's kind of went under the radar. And the Buccaneers drafted him in the 6th round. This guy's big. He's strong, right? He's like 6'4", 6'5", 320, 330 pounds. But he's built really, really well, right? And here's another story from the Hula Bowl that I've kind of realized. Being 6'3", 330 pounds, there's different ways 330 pounds can be built, right? When they were doing the measurements at the Hula Bowl, one of the things I had noticed right away was there were some guys that were just built different as offensive linemen, right? Luke Kendra out of Cincinnati is a great example. He is built absolutely different. Crazy shoulders, traps, absolutely just insane the way he looks. Versus there's some guys that don't look like that, and they're 320 pounds as well, and they don't look as strong. They don't look as well built as other guys, right? And one of the things with the guys that the Buccaneers drafted is they're all built really, really well, right? So, you got 6'4", 320, Elijah Klein. This guy's strong as hell. You look at Graham Barton is another guy, strong as hell, 6'5", 315, built really, really well. And another thing that Spytek said in that last segment is that, we're going to essentially bring in a ton of competition, and we're going to see who's going to rise to the occasion. He put it out there. He also kind of put it out there in a different part of the interview, which was, if Graham Barton has to, even though we drafted him and we think he'll be our center, if he has to kick out to guard because we feel like our other centers are better, we'll put Barton at left guard. We don't care that we drafted him as a center. Like, we will put him somewhere else if someone else rises to the occasion, right? And I love the fact that this guy's putting it out there that the competition element of it will be big, right? We want to make sure guys are competing to win jobs, as opposed to saying, hey, you're drafted with the 7th overall pick. We're going to just put you out there because you were drafted with the 7th overall pick, right? To me, I love the fact that this is what John Spytek values in guys, right? It's competition, high character. He's valuing guys, not necessarily based off of traits as the primary, right? But it's the character aspect that they love football. That's going to be the primary aspect. And, Bucky Irving, what he put out there, that statement that John Spytek tells us about, the first guy doesn't tackle me, right? For Bucky Irving to say that, that's confidence right there, man. And if a running back tells me, hey, I might be 5'7", I might be 5'8", I might be 5'9", but I guarantee you that first guy will never tackle me. And then the tape backs that up. I love that confidence, right? And you can tell that Spytek definitely has a way of how he values and how he's going to kind of attack and how he's going to build things. And to me, I love it, right? Now, I didn't mention that I have a little bit of criticism for Spytek. The criticism I have is going to be the fact that these guys took Graham Barton over Jackson Powers Johnson. I watch enough tape. Barton was a really good left tackle at Duke. He played center. I think it was his very first year. And then after that, he played tackle basically after that. But everybody knew Graham Barton was going to be a center at the next level. And no one thought he was going to be an actual tackle. 100%. He was guaranteed to transition back to the center position. And we knew he was going to be a really good football player. And he is, right? He had really good tape this past year. The guy's going to be an all-pro caliber player for a number of years, right? He'll be a really, really good football player. But the thing is Jackson Powers-Johnson's better, right? And there's no question about it. And I'm not being biased because I'm a Raiders fan. I will always tell you guys how it is, right? People ask me what I think about Colton Miller. Colton Miller is really, really good, but he is not a top 5 tackle, right? But he's still really, really good. And I'll be honest about it, right? The thing with a guy like Graham Barton is he's really, really, really good, but he's not Jackson Powers-Johnson. To me, Powers-Johnson's going to be the best center in the NFL. I think most people will start to actually recognize that over the course of this season. In my opinion, I actually think that Jackson Powers-Johnson right now is already the number 2 center in the NFL, right? Like, you know, and keep in mind, you know, I watch all these guys. I watch Tyler Linderbaum. I watch guys like Graham Barton and guys like Creed Humphrey, Drew Dalman, and all these other centers in the NFL. And I can tell you guys right now, there's not a lot of guys in the NFL like Jackson Powers-Johnson. Creed Humphrey, Quentin Nelson, Tyler Smith are probably the only 3 guys at the level of what Jackson Powers-Johnson kind of does. Even then, I think Powers-Johnson already does it better than a guy like Creed Humphrey. And I just don't say he's better because of the fact that Humphrey's done it for a couple of years. I think JPJ will be better, though. So to me, I question why they took Barton over JPJ because Powers-Johnson had incredible tape at Oregon. Right? Like, I don't think he lost a rep at Oregon. He's just straight up dominant. Right? He's throwing people. He's tossing people. He played with great technique as well. Now, if you say maybe it was the injury history, okay, that can make sense, definitely. But to me, it's just, there's no question about it, right? Powers-Johnson's going to be an elite level guy. And I don't think Barton's going to be bad. I think he'll be really good. But the fact that they took Barton over Powers-Johnson, I'd question that a little bit. Also, the Buccaneers took Kyle Trask in the 2nd round a couple years back. That was kind of questionable as well. Maybe he's our next quarterback, right? Maybe he just needed to develop a little bit. We'll see what ends up happening. Finally, I want to wrap it up and just show you guys one last thing that John Spytek was kind of asked about. He was asked about how he sets up his scouting department. And he also kind of talked a little bit about the coaching and how he, you know, values coaching and kind of his thoughts on it. Check out what he had to say.
I think when you go to set up a scouting department, the goal is to have everybody speak the same language, whether we're talking about grades or character or what are we looking for in a player. Like, the goal is to, when you walk into a draft room or draft meeting, we all know what we're supposed to be looking at and doing and talking about and focusing on. And the continuity that we've had now for, I'm going to my 9th season, and I feel like I'm one of the lowest tenured people on the staff sometimes. So, you know, I just think we all understand exactly what we're supposed to do. We understand the way that we're doing this, the kind of player we're looking for, both on the field and off the field. And it allows us to just do your job at a level that is hard otherwise, that the volatility makes it, if you're just changing this person out and this person out and this coach out, it's, you know, that's probably been our biggest challenge is just, you know, we have Dave, we're doing something good and he leaves and we have Liam here. So it keeps it fresh a little bit, but from a scouting standpoint, we understand who does what, when you do it. And Jason and I were actually just talking upstairs when we were doing free agency, like this feels like the least chaotic that it's been in a long time. And I don't know, I kind of missed the chaos, but at the same time, it was kind of nice to, everyone's just kind of doing their thing and we're getting good players.
So there you guys have it, right? He's basically putting it out there that, you know, in both scouting and coaching, you need consistency, right? If you're changing out your scouts every other year, you're going to have to explain to them what you value as, you know, as a certain person, right? If you're a general manager, you're going to have to explain to them what we value. We value high character. We value, you know, not traits, but production, right? If you're changing out your scouting department every other year, you're going to have to restart essentially from the beginning. And that's the same thing with coaching, right? Consistency is always the key. And he is 100% spot on. You know, the more I listen to John Spytek, the more I realize the kind of impacts he's had with the Buccaneers. You know, the Buccaneers are a really, really well-built organization, or at least they have in the last 10 years. It hasn't always been perfect, right? They haven't always hit on the quarterback. They haven't always gotten the right guy to kind of lead that team, but they've gotten it right? Like, they went with Jameis Winston at some point. That didn't work out, but they tried for a number of years. And they built a good roster around Jameis Winston to the point where the year they got rid of him and brought in Tom Brady, they went to the Super Bowl. Right, back-to-back years they went to the Super Bowl, just swapping out the quarterback. And the defense was the number 1 defense in the NFL. Right, and Spytek kind of helped build that. And again, consistency is a big part of it. Coaching, scouting, the front office. you got to be consistent. And I think with the Raiders, we fans know the Raiders have not been consistent, man. It's been easily our biggest issue this year, over the past like 5 years. You know, from the time Reggie McKenzie was here, he was here for a number of years, but like in the last year of Reggie McKenzie, you know, you fire Jack Del Rio. A year later, you fire Reggie McKenzie. After you fire Jack Del Rio, you bring in John Gruden. After you fire Reggie McKenzie, you bring in Mike Mayock. They go for 3 years. You make John Gruden resign in the middle of the year. Rich Bisaccia comes in, and now it's his show. And then you switch over to Josh McDaniels and Dave Ziegler. You fire Mike Mayock. That doesn't last too long. You bring in Tom Telesco, who did an incredible job. You fire him. Right? The inconsistency for the Raiders has been absolutely ridiculous. And I'm not surprised Ben Johnson did not want to come here, but I do hope that Spytek over the next, 2 to 3 years, right? You bring in a coach, rather it's Pete Carroll, rather that's Cliff Kingsbury, which is another rumor that's kind of trending. You bring these guys in, let them build. Just let them do their thing for a number of years, and we'll see how things kind of pan out over 3 or 4 years. And with that, hopefully the Raiders are in a position where if the coach does not work out, Spytek has built a good team, and all we need now is just whoever that next Kyle Shanahan, Sean McVay, Ben Johnson caliber of coach is. And then hopefully the Raiders are able to hire that guy because we're in a good spot. So we'll see what ends up happening, man. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. It took absolutely a long time to make, but I enjoyed making it. So let me know what you guys think. Thumbs up, subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time with another video.